Hey, it's me, Steve. It is September 29, 2017. Time is 16:49. It is 64 degrees Fahrenheit out, and it is Geo-Rant time. Now, this Geo-Rant's going to be on the subject of plate tectonics and trying to lock down when did plate tectonics actually begin. But I'm going to address a specific paper. I hope this rant isn't going to be too long, but it might be, forewarning. Generally, there's a geologic consensus that modern plate tectonics began at latest during the Paleoproterozoic, all right, with maybe a transition zone to about the Mesoarchean. But every once in a while, you get a guy who is a legitimate scientist. And by the way, us scientists are not immune from rambling rants, incoherent rants. We are prone to those just like everyone else. But every once in a while you get a guy who writes a paper that's published in a journal and you go, what the fuck? And I'm going to address one of those papers. But first I just want to say that I would love to find out when plate tectonics started, and we have many lines of evidence suggesting it was at the beginning of the Paleoproterozoic eon. But I ran across this paper actually a while ago, years ago, and I printed it out, a couple of volumes, because like I said, I'm trying to address all the arguments and evidence, so I printed a bunch of them today, and the one I'm going to address is this one in the top one here. All right, and this was written by a guy named Warren B. Hamilton. He does have a legitimate PhD. The guy's in his 90s. He's still alive. This paper's 2010. All right, he's one of two guys who tried to show evidence for modern plate tectonics beginning in the Neoproterozoic, which would be post 1 billion years ago, right before the Cambrian. So it's about 1,542 million years ago. And I've read this paper in detail, and I just, man. First of all, Warren Hamilton, like I said, is a legitimate scientist. This seems to be the most recent thing he has written. I'm going to get into something else he's written that's really rambly, and although it's not an official publication, it's kind of like, what the fuck? But there's literally like two papers arguing for a post-Paleoproterozoic beginning of plate tectonics, and this is one of them. So, and this was published in a legitimate scientific journal. This is it. I have written notes all over this thing. I'm not going to show it to you in any detail, but that's, if you want to look it up, you can. I actually got this, downloaded it while it was in press. I don't think this article is bad enough to warrant redaction, but it's pretty bad. The whole thing is very argumentative. It repeats itself over and over. He sits there and bashes on evidence for Archean plate tectonics, which we now pretty sure there was no plate tectonics during, at least up through the Mesoarchean, which would be up into about 2.8 billion years ago. So, I mean, that consensus has kind of been reached, but he gets into the Proterozoic and keeps mentioning the Archean while talking about the Proterozoic and repeating the same stuff over and over. His very first sentence in his abstract, I'm just going to put this right here, is this. All right, this paper is very selective in its arguments, okay? It doesn't really address many things. It's by the way, he is still, as far as I'm aware, currently at the Colorado School of Mines, which means he was there when I was in college in the 90s, and when I went to field camp 2001, I think he was there then. But this addresses ophelites, which are basically pieces of mantle lodged up onto the continent. that definition has been reached. It was kind of vague up until maybe about 10, 15 years ago. There were many different definitions of it, but he doesn't directly define that, and he says ophiolite somewhere around a dozen plus times in here, but he does allude to that's the definition he's using, so I'll give him that. But number one, the title of this paper is Plate Tectonics Began in Neoproterozoic Time and Plumes from Deep Mantle Have Never Operated. That's a very clickbaity title, and a lot of his work seems to be, especially this later work, he seems to be very prone to this clickbaity type stuff. A better title for something like this would have been, did modern plate tectonics begin operating in Neoproterozoic time or later? That could have been a fine title. To you future scientists out there, you don't want clickbaity titles, all right? They're not useful. And that title right there has been like, huh? Because he says it with such authority, like he knows, and doesn't, that's when it started. So the point of me doing this is I'm trying to show you that even within the scientific community, we disagree on things. We don't just accept everything everybody throws at us. And like I said, this is only one of like 2 papers that are on this side. All right, and there are literally dozens of other papers which I've printed that aren't, that suggest earlier plate tectonics. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble, so I'll try to cut it here. But he uses words like dogma, and he says, despite disproof of its early basis and of its subsequent generalization and predictions. He uses very argumentative language in here. And throughout this entire, you can download this free online, so you can get it if you want. And like I said, it's entirely argumentative. There's no actual data presented in this paper. There's a lot of citations for other people's work that question when plate tectonics started. That doesn't mean they thought it started Neoproterozoic time. It's just, I don't know. The closest thing to evidence he provides is this diagram, this figure here, figure 1. I mean, he does address some good points and some obvious questions, but we're aware of these, And the reason why we model plate tectonics back to at least Paleoproterozoic time is because there's a ton of evidence that we had a solid lithosphere back then. We don't just do this. Like he sits there and says, see if I can find the exact quote without making this too long. I agree with the Archean that there's no evidence for plate tectonics in the Archean, well, at least the, first half or so of it. But he sits here and he goes on this long rant about Paleoproterozoic and Mesoproterozoic tectonics. And it's section 5 in this. And he says, and I quote, and I'll show you this just so you know I'm not quote mining, that this is in context. He says there are no proved Paleoproterozoic or Mesoproterozoic oophilites, accretionary wedges, blue schists, oceanic or continental magmatic arches, or lithospheric continent/ocean. Crap, I can't read it. It's under the stapler. But anyway, here. Basically, what he's saying is there's no evidence for plate tectonics in the Paleoproterozoic and Mesoproterozoic, but here it is up close, so you can read it yourself. I'll try to pull this back as far as I can so you can read the entire thing. All right, so that is flat outright wrong. All right, nowhere in this paper he talks about accretionary margins and island arcs. He talks mostly about the subduction process, but he ignores the active margin or passive margin process. He doesn't mention the Huronian supergroup, the Snowy Pass group, any of the mid-continental rift rocks, and he doesn't mention any of these, or the Marquette Range supergroup. He mentions some of this. He does mention the South African Kapaval basin, but in passing. And these are very important things to figuring out the history of the planet and whether plate tectonics was legitimate or not. All right? He mentions no supercontinents except Rodinia to bash it. And he cites he cites a paper mentioning the supercontinent Nuna, Schuttfeld 2010, but doesn't mention that supercontinent anywhere in the paper. But that's, whatever. I mean, he could have just taken something from that, not the whole thing. But the fact that he doesn't mention any supercontinents, I mean, not even Pangea, and that was post Neoproterozoic. He doesn't even mention that one. But just to show you that we know of oophilites that are Mesoproterozoic in age, actually, technically, these would be Paleoproterozoic in age. The ILSG, one of their Iron Mountain conferences, every year they have a conference, and this one was held in Iron Mountain. That's the cover. You can look it up. This is totally free online. You can get this entire thing for free. But we're just going to go through this. There are oophilites slightly older than 1.87 billion years in northeastern Wisconsin. All right? That's that figure right there. Okay? Now, that's just a figure. Well, how do we know? Are there any descriptions in this field trip guidebook? Yes, there are. We're going to get to that here in a second if I can click through these pages and find them. But they actually take you to one of the field trip sites, and they take you right to the oophilite. Right there. Oh, by the way, this is pre his Neoproterozoic paper. All right. This was 2003. So he should have been aware of it. And for somebody who supposedly has tramped around Canada, he sure doesn't seem to know about these things. And as a matter of fact, here on page 26, and I quote, "Quintessect formation generally are similar to those characteristic Phanerozoic oophilitic sequences." And that's one of the things he argues in his Neoproterozoic paper. He says there are no pre-Phanerozoic oophilites. All right. So he's wrong there. And this is a typical oophilite sequence right here, just so you know. And on that same page it says, incomplete sequences are common in oophilites found in many orogenic belts, mountain, building events. And it says, goes on to say, these are similar to Cenozoic, which is Phanerozoic, supersubduction zone oophilites like those in the coast ranges in California. And then they cite those who have done work in that area. So, I don't know how he missed that, but I don't know. I mean, I don't want to bash a fellow ex-military officer, but the guy, this is a poor paper, all right? I would never submit something like this. And crap, they almost rejected my paper, my lithostratigraphic paper on the Copper Harbor Formation, and it's all observational based because one of the reviewers is a geophysicist who doesn't know the difference between chrono and lithostratigraphy, but it's getting published, so that's fine. But he wrote something in 2008, and if you go on his bibliography, his website, it pops right up, and it's downloadable. It also rambles a lot. Zombie science and geoscience, clickbaity. And I'll just let you see that right there. Once again, he uses words like dogma, entrenched ideas and stuff like that. But this is a rambling paper. It's not an official published paper in a peer-reviewed journal. But it just goes on and provides no evidence of anything. It just rambles. So, in my opinion, his paper is a poor scientific paper. It brings up some good points and questions that are valid, but in no way provides a single shred of evidence for the plate tectonics beginning in Neoproterozoic time at all. It ignores a bunch of evidence to the contrary, only deals with island arcs and accretiary terrains, but doesn't mention microcontinents. It just mentions island arcs. So, you know, it's, I guess it's neither here nor there. But anyway, this is longer than I wanted it to be. But anyway, that's my rant, and I hope you learned something.